Little girl whispered, "Everyone has a home, except me." What Millionaire CEO saw next broke his heart. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a bitterly cold evening, the kind where the wind stung your face and the world seemed a little more indifferent. Michael Owens, a millionaire and the CEO of a leading tech firm, was walking down the city streets, alone as usual. The Christmas lights above twinkled, casting a festive glow across the city, but Michael felt none of the warmth that others seemed to experience. His suit, tailored to perfection, looked out of place amidst the harsh chill of the evening. He pulled his coat tighter, his thoughts drifting to the business meetings he had just left. Everything was predictable, orderly, but all too empty. As he walked, his mind wandered to the projects awaiting his attention, the numbers he had to review, the people who depended on him, yet none of it felt real. It felt like another night, another lonely evening in his luxurious penthouse apartment, and yet something tugged at him tonight, pulling him from his office and out into the streets. As he walked down the sidewalk, his eyes caught something that made his steps slow. At first, he thought it was just another stray dog or someone leaving trash behind. But no, it was a little girl, barely 7 years old, sitting on the cold sidewalk, her face buried in her small hands. Michael stopped in his tracks, his heart tightening. She was so small, so fragile, her clothes tattered and ill-fitting for the weather. The thin jacket she wore did little to protect her from the cold. The snow around her had settled, covering her shoes, which were barely recognizable as they were soaked through. He couldn't believe it. How could someone let a child sit alone in the snow like that? Her body trembled as she quietly sobbed, not loud enough for the world around her to hear, but enough for Michael to feel the weight of her sorrow. "Please, don't hurt us," the girl whispered between sobs. Her voice, though faint, carried a sense of helplessness that hit Michael like a wave. The words struck him deeply, and for a moment, the noise of the city faded away. He could hardly move, his eyes fixed on her. She didn't look up. She just sat there, hugging her knees to her chest, the quiet plea still hanging in the air. Michael's chest tightened. The image of this tiny, broken figure, sitting alone in the cold, was too much for him to ignore. Without thinking, he walked over to her, kneeling down. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently, his voice trembling. The girl looked up, her tear-streaked face meeting his. She was so young, her eyes wide and full of fear. "My mommy is really sick. She told me to bring dinner home," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael froze, the words hanging in the cold air. What could he possibly say to that? How could anyone let a child endure such pain? He could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just a moment of distress. It was a cry for help, a cry that had been ignored by everyone else passing by. Something inside him stirred, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Compassion, concern, maybe even something deeper. "Come on," he said softly, reaching out to her. "Let's get you some help. You're not alone anymore." As he picked her up, his heart pounded in his chest. He was no longer walking down the street. He was carrying the weight of something far greater. And in that moment, everything changed. As Michael cradled the little girl in his arms, he could feel the weight of her fragile body. Her skin was cold, and her tiny hands clutched onto his coat as if it were her only lifeline. He had no idea who she was or where she came from. But one thing was clear: she needed help, and fast. His mind raced as he looked around, his eyes scanning the busy streets filled with people. But none of them seemed to notice the child. The city was moving at its usual pace, indifferent to the suffering around it. Michael's pulse quickened as he walked, his thoughts focusing on one thing: getting her somewhere safe. He made his way to his car, the driver already standing by, looking confused when he saw the little girl in Michael's arms. Without a word, Michael opened the door, and as the driver glanced at him, he simply said, "Mass General Hospital. Hurry." The driver nodded and quickly started the car, and Michael sat back, holding the girl close, feeling her shiver against him. Her breathing was shallow, and Michael's heart sank as he realized how cold she was. He gently placed his hand on her back, trying to warm her up, his mind spinning with questions. Who was she? Why was she alone? Where was her family? As the car sped through the streets of Boston, Michael glanced down at her. Her dark hair was matted with snow, and her clothes were wet, sticking to her small body. She looked so out of place in this world, so vulnerable. But her words from earlier echoed in his mind. "My mommy is really sick. She told me to bring dinner home." Michael's chest tightened as he remembered the look in her eyes when she had spoken. It was a mixture of fear and determination, and it broke his heart. He could not understand how anyone could let a child go through this. How could someone so young be left alone in the world, with no one to care for her? The more he thought about it, the more angry he became. The world was full of people with power, wealth, and resources, yet here was a child alone, cold, and scared. His thoughts were interrupted when the car pulled up to the hospital. The driver quickly opened the door, and Michael rushed out with the little girl in his arms. He didn't stop to think about his appearance, his expensive suit, his polished shoes. All of it seemed meaningless now. His only focus was getting this girl the help she needed. He rushed through the automatic doors of the hospital, the bright fluorescent lights blinding him for a moment. Nurses were moving quickly, attending to patients in the emergency room. But Michael didn't wait. He walked straight up to the nearest nurse. "She needs help now," he said urgently, his voice shaking. The nurse looked at him, then at the girl in his arms, and without asking any questions, she immediately called for a gurney. Michael felt a sense of relief wash over him as the nurse guided him to an exam room. The little girl was placed on the gurney, her body trembling. And as the nurses began to work, Michael stood off to the side, unable to move. He watched as they checked her temperature, hooked her up to an IV, and tried to get her stable. He felt helpless, a feeling he wasn't used to. As the minutes ticked by, the small room felt suffocating. He needed to know who she was, why she was alone, and what had happened to her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the little girl's eyes fluttered open. She looked around the room, confused and disoriented, before locking eyes with Michael. Her lips trembled as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where's my mommy?" Michael's heart shattered. "Your mommy is sick," he said softly. "You're safe now. We're going to make sure you're okay." She didn't say anything else, but her expression softened slightly. Michael took a step forward, reaching out gently to hold her hand. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice filled with tenderness. The little girl hesitated for a moment before whispering, "Ava, Ava." Michael's mind raced again. He didn't know why, but the name struck him. It was so familiar, like he had heard it before. but he couldn't place it. He pushed the thought aside for now and focused on the child in front of him. Ava, he repeated softly, his voice steady. You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you. As the nurse continued her work, Michael found a seat beside Ava's bed. He sat quietly, watching her, the weight of the moment sinking in. He had no idea what the next steps were, but one thing was certain: his life had just changed. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years: compassion, a connection to another human being. Ava may have been the one in need of saving, but in some strange way, she had already begun to save him. As Michael sat by Ava's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest as she slept, his mind kept racing. He had never imagined his life taking such a turn. Just a few hours ago, he was wrapped up in meetings, numbers, and corporate decisions, the usual life of a billionaire CEO. Now, here he was in a hospital room, waiting for answers about a little girl who had shown up in his life in the most unexpected way. The world outside seemed to continue on as usual, but inside the sterile white walls of the hospital, everything had changed. Michael looked at Ava, her small, fragile form wrapped in a hospital blanket. Her face was calm now, but he couldn't forget the look of fear in her eyes when she had woken up earlier and asked for her mother. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of life she had led to get to this point. Who had let her wander the streets alone? Why was she out there in the first place? These questions gnawed at him, but no answers came. As he sat there, he recalled the moment when he first picked her up, feeling her small, trembling body in his arms. It was like holding a fragile piece of glass, so delicate and full of pain. He remembered her words. "My mommy is really sick. She told me to bring dinner home." His heart had broken then. How could anyone put a child through something like this? He thought of his own childhood. How different it had been. His family had always been there for him. There had always been warmth, support, and love. His father, though distant at times, had never allowed him to feel abandoned. Michael shook his head, trying to push the thoughts aside. This was not about him. This was about Ava. He had to focus on her, on what she needed. As the minutes stretched into hours, Michael's resolve hardened. He couldn't just walk away from this. He couldn't just hand her off to someone else and forget about her. She was depending on him, and he wasn't going to let her down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door to Ava's room opened, and a nurse entered with a clipboard in her hand. "Mr. Owens," she said, looking up at him. "Ava is stable for now. We've run some tests, and we're still waiting for the results. However, she is in good hands here." Michael stood up, his eyes never leaving Ava's peaceful face. "What do we know about her situation?" he asked. The nurse sighed, looking down at her clipboard. "She was found in a severe state of neglect. Her mother is indeed very sick, but it seems that Ava has been caring for her alone for some time. There were no signs of a stable home life, and it's clear that she's been through a lot." Michael's heart sank. He couldn't believe it. A little girl, so young, had been forced to carry such a heavy burden. "And her mother?" he asked, his voice tight. "She's being treated. We're doing everything we can," the nurse replied. "But Ava, she's had a rough time. She's very withdrawn, and there are signs of emotional trauma. It's going to take time for her to heal." Michael nodded, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. He felt a deep urge to protect Ava, to ensure that she would never have to go through anything like this again. But what could he do? He was just one man, with a company to run, a life to manage. He couldn't adopt every child in need. But then again, something told him that this wasn't just any situation. This was different. He had to do something. As the nurse continued to speak, Michael's thoughts drifted to the conversation he had had with his assistant earlier that day. He had told her he needed a break, that he had to get away from the office for a while. He had no idea that this would be the result of that decision. But somehow, it felt right. It felt like fate had led him to this moment, to this little girl who had no one else to turn to. The nurse finished her report, and Michael nodded once again. "Thank you for your care," he said, his voice steady. "I want to stay with her. I'll take care of everything from here." The nurse gave him a reassuring smile. "Of course, Mr. Owens. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." She turned to leave, but before she did, she glanced back at Michael. "She's lucky to have someone like you looking after her." Michael didn't respond. He simply watched as she left the room. The words lingered in the air. And for the first time in a long while, Michael felt something shift within him. He had always prided himself on his success, his wealth, and his ability to control every aspect of his life. But now, as he sat next to Ava's bed, he realized that none of that mattered. What mattered was that a little girl had needed him, and for once in his life, he had done the right thing. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this: he was going to do everything in his power to make sure Ava would never have to face the world alone again. Michael sat beside Ava's bed, watching her sleep, her small chest rising and falling in a rhythmic motion that brought him a sense of relief. It had been a few days since that fateful moment on the street, and though Ava was stable now, her situation weighed heavily on him. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the life she must have endured before he found her. His mind raced with questions. How had things gotten this bad? Who was responsible for the neglect she had suffered? Michael, a man who had built his entire life on control and order, felt a deep sense of helplessness. He was used to solving problems, tackling challenges head-on. But this was different. This wasn't just a business deal or a corporate challenge. This was a child's life, and it was fragile in ways he had never experienced before. Ava's tiny form in the hospital bed seemed so vulnerable. She had already suffered more than most adults ever would, but she was a fighter. Even now, as she rested, there was something about her strength that inspired Michael. It made him want to protect her, to ensure that no one would ever hurt her again. He thought about his own life, the way he had lived for so long, surrounded by wealth and success, but lacking in something far more important: human connection. He had spent years building his company, focusing on profits, on achieving more, on being the best. But in all that time, he had neglected what really mattered: people. Ava had reminded him of that, of the power of compassion, of the importance of showing up when someone needed you. He had never thought of himself as the type of person who could make a difference in someone's life. But with Ava, something had changed. He didn't know how or why, but he knew that he couldn't just walk away from her. He had to help her. As the days passed, Michael found himself spending more time with Ava. Even though the hospital staff were still handling her medical care, he would sit by her bed, talking to her in soft, comforting tones, trying to ease the fear and confusion in her eyes. He found himself becoming deeply attached to her, wanting to be the protector she so desperately needed. He could tell that she was beginning to trust him, that she was starting to open up little by little. One evening, as he sat beside her, holding her hand, she looked up at him, her large brown eyes filled with both gratitude and sorrow. "Are you going to take me home?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Michael's heart ached at her words. "I will, Ava," he said softly. "I'll take you wherever you need to go." She gave him a weak smile, her lips trembling. "I just want my mommy to be better," she whispered. Michael's chest tightened. He couldn't imagine what it must be like for her to carry that kind of worry at such a young age. He didn't know what the future held, but he promised himself that he would do everything in his power to make sure that Ava had a safe and happy life from that point forward. Later that night, after Ava had fallen asleep, Michael stepped out of the hospital room and made a phone call to his lawyer. He knew this was going to be a long road, but he wasn't going to let Ava face it alone. There had to be a way to give her the life she deserved, to make sure she had a stable home, and to ensure that no one would ever hurt her again. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he was determined to find them. Over the next few weeks, Michael worked tirelessly with the hospital staff, social services, and legal professionals to ensure that Ava's future was secure. He learned that her mother, though still very ill, was being cared for and would eventually recover. But for now, it was clear that Ava needed more than just a hospital. She needed a family, and she needed a stable environment to heal. And Michael was determined to be the one to provide that for her. As the days turned into weeks, Michael found himself becoming more and more involved in Ava's life. He started visiting her at the hospital every day, staying by her side as much as possible. He was there when she took her first steps out of the hospital, there when she smiled for the first time in weeks. And each time he saw that small smile, his heart swelled with pride and hope. Michael was beginning to realize that Ava wasn't just changing her own life, she was changing his as well. He had come to understand that true success wasn't about business deals, financial gains, or corporate victories. It was about the people you help, the lives you touch, and the love you give. And in helping Ava, he was starting to heal himself, starting to rebuild a part of him that he had buried for too long. Michael didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Ava down. He was going to be there for her, to give her the love and care she deserved, and to help her build a life full of hope and opportunity. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, and he would never stop fighting for her happiness. As the days passed, Michael's life began to shift in ways he hadn't expected. Ava was becoming more than just a child he had rescued. She was becoming a part of his life, a reason to open his heart in ways he hadn't done in years. The cold, sterile world he had built around himself, filled with boardrooms and high-rise offices, now felt distant, almost irrelevant compared to the warmth he felt when he was with her. Every time he saw her smile, every time she asked him if he was coming to visit her that day, he felt a surge of something he had long forgotten: love, connection, a sense of purpose. The child who had once been nothing more than a stranger in need was now a part of his world, and he was beginning to understand what it meant to truly care for someone beyond himself. But the journey wasn't without its struggles. Ava had her moments of fear, of sadness, and of longing. She still talked about her mother constantly, asking when she would come home. Michael did his best to reassure her, to tell her that her mother was getting better, that she would be there soon. But there were times when he wasn't sure if that was enough. The weight of responsibility was heavy, and Michael often found himself lying awake at night, wondering if he was doing the right thing. Was he really capable of being the father figure Ava needed? He had no experience with children, no experience with parenting. He was a businessman, a man used to making calculated decisions and handling things with precision. But this was different. This was about a little girl who had been through more than anyone should endure, and Michael knew that he couldn't simply fix her or make everything better with a few kind words. He had to be there for her, to support her in every way possible, to show her that the world could be a safe place, that not everyone would abandon her. As he spent more time with Ava, he began to see the cracks in his own heart that had been there for years. He had buried them deep inside, focusing on his work, on his success, on his empire. But now, with Ava in his life, those cracks were starting to heal. He was beginning to understand that success didn't mean anything if you didn't have anyone to share it with. He didn't need more money, more accolades, or more accomplishments. What he needed, what he truly needed, was the connection he had been missing all along. One evening, as Michael and Ava sat together in his living room, the soft glow of the fireplace casting a warm light over the room, Ava looked up at him with her big brown eyes and asked, "Do you think my mommy will be okay?" Michael's heart ached. He had never wanted to make a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. But in that moment, he knew that he had to give her hope, even if it was uncertain. "Yes, Ava," he said softly, his voice steady, despite the tightness in his chest. "I believe she will be okay. And when she is, we'll all be together again." Ava smiled faintly, though it was clear she still had doubts. Michael could see the fear in her eyes, the longing for her mother that was so deep it almost broke him. But he also saw something else, a spark of trust, a belief that things could get better, that she didn't have to face the world alone. It was in that moment that Michael realized how much she had already changed his life. She had brought light into the dark corners of his heart, filling the spaces that had been empty for so long. And in turn, he would do everything in his power to make sure she never felt alone again. The next few weeks were filled with both progress and setbacks. Ava continued to grow stronger, physically and emotionally, but there were still moments when the trauma of her past would surface. Moments when she would cry out for her mother, moments when she seemed lost in a world that had once been so cruel to her. Michael was there for every single one of those moments. He didn't have all the answers, but he gave her his time, his attention, and his heart. Slowly, she began to open up more. She started to laugh again, to play, to ask questions about the world around her. She would draw pictures for him, telling stories with crayons and markers, and it became clear that she was finding a way to heal, little by little. It wasn't perfect, and there were still many challenges ahead, but Michael felt a sense of hope for the first time in a long time. He wasn't just helping Ava, she was helping him too, and that was a gift he had never expected. The relationship they had started to build was changing both of them in ways that were impossible to ignore. Michael knew that Ava's journey was far from over, but he also knew that she had a future now, a future where she could be safe, loved, and protected. And with that realization came a new sense of purpose for him. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a protector, a father figure, and a person who could make a real difference in someone's life. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The days passed, and the bond between Michael and Ava grew stronger with each one. Michael found himself looking forward to his visits to the hospital, to the quiet moments they shared together, and to seeing her smile, however faint it might be. Ava was no longer the frightened, withdrawn child he had first encountered on the street. She was slowly coming out of her shell, slowly learning to trust again. Michael, too, was beginning to realize that he was not the same man he had been before she came into his life. The walls he had built around himself, the walls that had kept him focused on success and control, were crumbling, piece by piece. Ava was slowly teaching him how to feel again, how to open his heart, and most importantly, how to love. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of fear and uncertainty. Moments when Ava would cry for her mother. Moments when the past seemed to catch up with her. But Michael stood by her side through every one of those moments. It was in those quiet moments that Michael realized just how much his life had changed. He had spent so many years thinking that his success in business was the most important thing in the world. But now, He understood that true success was about people, about the relationships you built, about the love you gave. As the weeks went by, Michael made it his mission to be there for Ava, to be the father figure she needed, the protector she had been waiting for. It wasn't easy, but nothing about this journey had been. He spent countless hours in meetings with lawyers, social workers, and doctors, ensuring that Ava's future would be secure, ensuring that she would have a stable, loving environment to grow up in. It was exhausting, emotionally draining work, but he didn't mind. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was doing something that mattered, something that would make a real difference. As the days turned into weeks, Michael's life began to revolve around Ava. His work took a back seat to her well-being, and he couldn't have been happier. He found joy in the small things, like reading her stories at bedtime, playing games with her in the hospital room, and watching her slowly open up, slowly heal from the trauma that had shaped her young life. But it wasn't just Ava who was changing. Michael was changing too. He found himself rediscovering parts of himself that he had long buried: his ability to care, to empathize, to love. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when he questioned if he was doing the right thing. Could he really be the father figure Ava needed? Was he prepared for the challenges of raising a child? But each time those doubts crept in, he would look at Ava, at the trust in her eyes, at the way she clung to him when she was scared, at the way she smiled when he promised her that everything would be okay. And he knew that he couldn't turn back. He had to see this through. One afternoon, as Michael sat beside Ava's bed, watching her color a picture she had drawn for him, he realized just how far they had come. He remembered the first time he had held her, how fragile and broken she had seemed. Now, she was laughing, talking about her favorite things, telling him stories about her imaginary friends. He couldn't believe how much she had blossomed in such a short amount of time. And he knew, deep down, that he had a part in that. He had helped give her the safety and security she had so desperately needed. But it wasn't just about her. It was about them, about the family they were building together. Michael had never imagined that his life would take such a turn, that he would find himself not just saving a child but being saved by her. He had spent so many years living in a world of numbers and profit margins, and now he was living in a world of love and connection, a world where a little girl's smile meant more to him than any business deal ever could. Ava had changed everything, and he knew without a doubt that he would do whatever it took to make sure she never felt alone again. He had made a promise to her, and he would keep that promise for as long as he lived. As the sun set that evening, casting a soft glow across the hospital room, Michael sat back in his chair, looking at Ava. She had finished her picture and was now drawing small hearts on the paper. "What's this?" he asked, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Ava looked up at him, her eyes full of warmth. "It's for you," she said softly. "It's my heart. I want you to have it." Michael's heart swelled with emotion as he took the picture from her hand. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he would always be there for Ava, always be the father figure she needed. Together, they would build a future full of love, hope, and the promise that they would never be alone again. As the weeks went by, Michael began to see just how much Ava was healing, both physically and emotionally. Her laughter filled the house, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. The quiet of his mansion was slowly being replaced with the sounds of her joy, her excited footsteps down the hall, her voice calling for him to play, and her questions about everything around her. She was beginning to thrive, to trust again, and to let go of the fear that had once consumed her. But even as Ava's spirits lifted, Michael couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in his chest. It was the feeling that something wasn't quite right, that there was still a shadow hanging over them. He had made promises to her to keep her safe, to protect her, to give her a home filled with love, but there was one promise he had yet to fulfill: the promise to reunite her with her mother. He hadn't told Ava yet, but deep down, he knew that her mother's recovery was taking longer than anyone had hoped. The doctors had assured him that Ava's mother, Emily, would recover eventually, but they had made it clear that her recovery would take time. There were still moments when Michael could see the sadness in Ava's eyes. Moments when she would ask if her mommy was coming home today. Moments when she would clutch her teddy bear tighter and whisper, "I miss my mommy." Michael tried his best to comfort her, to tell her that her mother was getting better and that soon they would all be together. But there were times when even his reassuring words felt empty. He knew he couldn't make promises he wasn't sure he could keep. The truth was, the situation was more complicated than he had anticipated. Emily's condition was better, but she wasn't ready to care for Ava just yet. Michael spent hours at the hospital, meeting with doctors, discussing treatment plans, and making sure everything was in place for when Emily was finally able to return home. But as the days turned into weeks, Michael began to wonder if there was more he could do. He had become so deeply involved in Ava's life, and the bond between them had grown so strong that the thought of her going back to her mother, at least in her current state, made him hesitate. It wasn't that he didn't want Ava to be with her mother. He did. But he also knew that the little girl had come to rely on him. She had come to see him not just as a protector, but as a father figure. And Michael couldn't ignore the deep connection they shared. He wanted to keep her safe, wanted to make sure that she didn't have to experience the same pain and uncertainty she had before. But he also knew that he had no right to keep her from her mother forever. He couldn't be the one to make that decision. It wasn't his place. One evening, as he sat in the living room, reflecting on everything that had happened, Ava came in, holding a piece of paper in her hands. "Look, Mr. Owens," she said, her eyes bright. "I drew a picture for you." Michael smiled and took the picture from her hand. It was a drawing of a family, a mother, a father, and a little girl holding hands. It was simple, but it struck him deeply. Ava had drawn what she wanted most in the world: to be with both of her parents again, to have the family she had been missing for so long. Michael's heart ached as he looked at the drawing. He had made a promise to Ava, a promise to protect her and to give her the love and security she deserved. But now, he was faced with a choice, one that no one could make for him. He could keep her with him, keep her safe, keep her close. But was that what was best for her? Or was it better for her to be with her mother, to have that bond restored, even if it meant taking a risk? Michael didn't know the answer, but he knew one thing for sure: he would never stop fighting for Ava. She deserved a chance at a real family, a chance to heal and to grow without fear. And if that meant facing his own fears, facing the possibility of letting her go, then he would do it. The next day, Michael made the decision to meet with Emily, to have an honest conversation about the future. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was time. It was time to let Ava's mother back into her life, to allow them to rebuild their family. As he walked into the hospital room, Emily looked up at him, her face pale, but full of gratitude. Michael took a deep breath and sat down beside her. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Ava is getting better. She's doing so well, but I think it's time for her to be with you again. I know you're not fully healed yet, but she needs you. You need her, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you both have a chance to start fresh." Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to take Michael's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what to say. I'm scared. I'm not ready, but I want to try." "For her," Michael nodded. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said. "We'll figure this out together." As he left the hospital that day, Michael felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had done what was best for Ava, and now it was time for her to reunite with her mother. It wasn't the end of their journey, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where healing could begin, where love could flourish, and where the bond between a mother, a daughter, and a man who had become their family would be stronger than ever. The days following Michael's conversation with Emily felt like a blur. He had made the decision, but that didn't mean it was easy. Ava was slowly adjusting to the idea of being reunited with her mother, but Michael could still see the fear in her eyes. She wasn't ready to let go of him. For weeks, he had been her protector, the one who had held her when she cried, the one who had shown her that the world could be safe again. Now, the possibility of her going back to her mother was real, and that scared her. Michael knew it wasn't just about what was best for him anymore. It was about what was best for Ava. As much as he wanted to hold on to her, to keep her close, he knew that she needed her mother more than anything else. He wasn't replacing her father. He was simply trying to be the support system she needed. Michael had always been a man who valued control, who found comfort in routine and order. But with Ava, he had learned that life wasn't always about control. Sometimes it was about letting go and trusting that things would work out. He wasn't sure if he was ready to let her go, but he had to. It was the right thing to do. Michael spent hours preparing for that moment. He helped Ava pack her things, carefully folding her clothes and making sure her favorite teddy bear was safely tucked away. When the day arrived, he drove her to the hospital where Emily had been staying. The drive was quiet, with only the sound of the car's engine and the occasional hum of a passing car outside. Ava sat in the back seat, her small hands clutching her teddy bear, her eyes staring out the window. Michael stole glances at her through the rearview mirror. He could see the uncertainty on her face, the sadness that hadn't quite gone away. He wanted to say something to make her feel better, but he didn't know what words could possibly do that. When they arrived at the hospital, Michael parked the car and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ava was still clutching her bear, her little body tense. Michael took a deep breath and got out of the car. He opened the back door and helped Ava out. "It's going to be okay," he said softly. Ava didn't respond. She just looked up at him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Together, they walked inside. Emily was waiting for them in the hospital lobby. She looked healthier, but there was still a lingering sadness in her eyes. When she saw Ava, her face softened, and she opened her arms. Ava hesitated, looking up at Michael, as if to ask if it was okay. Michael nodded. "She's your mom, Ava," he said gently. "It's okay to go to her." Ava slowly walked toward Emily, and for a moment they stood there, just looking at each other. Then Emily knelt down and pulled Ava into her arms. Michael stood back, watching as the two of them embraced. It wasn't a perfect moment. There was still pain, still fear, but it was a start. Slowly, over the next few days, Ava began to adjust to being with her mother again. It wasn't easy for either of them. Emily had a lot of work to do, both physically and emotionally, to get back to a place where she could care for her daughter the way she needed to. But Michael was there, offering support in every way he could. He knew that their journey wasn't over, that there would be challenges ahead. But he also knew that Ava had a chance now. A real chance. It wasn't the end of the road, but it was the beginning of something new. Michael would continue to be a part of Ava's life, whether she lived with him or not. He had made a promise to her, and he would keep it, no matter what. That night, after everything had settled down, Michael found himself sitting in his office, the weight of the day finally catching up with him. He sat back in his chair, his thoughts drifting. He thought about how much had changed in such a short amount of time. Ava had come into his life like a storm, but she had also brought light. She had taught him what it really meant to care about someone, to love unconditionally. For so many years, Michael had been focused on success, on building his empire, on climbing the corporate ladder. But in those quiet moments with Ava, he had discovered something more important than all of it. He had discovered what it meant to be human, and in the midst of all his success, he had forgotten that. Ava had reminded him that the best things in life weren't always tangible sometimes. They were the people you held close, the relationships you built, and the love you gave. Michael leaned forward in his chair, feeling the weight of everything he had experienced. He wasn't the same man who had picked Ava up off the street months ago. He was better, stronger, and more whole. And it was all because of her, the little girl who had come into his life when he least expected it, and who had changed everything. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for sure. He would always be there for her, and he would always protect her. As the night stretched on, Michael made a vow to himself that no matter what came next, he would never let her go. Ava had found her way into his heart, and he was never going to let her out. As the weeks turned into months, Michael continued to navigate the delicate balance of supporting Ava and her mother, Emily, as they worked to rebuild their lives. Ava had settled back in with her mother, but it was clear that the journey was far from over. Though Emily had made incredible progress, both physically and emotionally, there was a long road ahead for their family. Ava had adjusted to being with her mother, but there were still moments when the shadows of the past crept into her lifetimes, when she would withdraw, when the fear of losing her mother would flare up again. Michael was there for both of them, as much as he could be. He made sure that Ava knew she could always turn to him when she needed someone. He had promised her that he would never leave, and he intended to keep that promise. Despite his growing attachment to Ava, Michael knew the time was coming when he would have to let go. At least in some ways. Ava's recovery was not just about healing from the trauma of her past. It was about creating a future. And that future meant allowing her to have a relationship with her mother that was built on love, trust, and mutual support. Emily had been hesitant at first, unsure of how she could ever make up for the time lost with her daughter. But Michael could see the bond between them growing stronger every day. Ava's laughter, once stifled by fear, was becoming more frequent. Her small, tentative steps toward healing were turning into strides. She was opening up again, not just to her mother, but to the world around her. And that was something Michael had always known was possible, even when he wasn't sure he believed it himself. As Emily and Ava began to find their rhythm, Michael found himself spending more time at his company. It had been a long time since he had focused on business, and while he had been happy to dedicate his energy to helping Ava and Emily, he knew that his company was still waiting for his leadership. The calls and meetings had piled up, and his absence had been noticeable. The first few weeks had been about survival, about making sure Ava had what she needed, about supporting Emily through her recovery. But now, Michael had to return to his responsibilities. He had to find a way to balance his career with his commitment to Ava and Emily. It wasn't easy. Michael had spent so much of his life focused on his career, believing that success and achievement were the measures of his worth. But as he sat in his office once again, surrounded by his team and the projects that demanded his attention, he realized something important. Success wasn't just about the numbers on a report or the profits at the end of the year. Success was about making a difference, about being there for the people who needed you. And he had already found the greatest success of all, helping Ava find her way back to the light. Still, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing something. He had become so accustomed to being Ava's protector, to being the person she turned to for comfort and guidance. And now he had to step back. It wasn't easy. especially when he saw the look in her eyes when they spoke on the phone or when they visited each other. She had grown so much, and yet she still needed him. But Michael knew that it was time for her to grow, time for her to be with her mother in the way that she needed. And so, they moved forward, step by step, in their new life. Michael's role in Ava's life was no longer that of a parent, but that of a trusted mentor, a guide. He was still a part of her world, but he no longer had to be the one to carry her through everything. Ava and Emily were rebuilding their family, and Michael could see the strength in both of them. It was a quiet victory. It wasn't a fairy tale, and it wasn't easy. But it was real, and that made all the difference. As time went on, Michael and Emily continued to build their own relationship, one rooted in mutual respect and understanding. It was not without its challenges, but both of them were committed to creating a stable, loving environment for Ava. It wasn't about perfection, it was about progress, about learning to love and trust again. One evening, as Michael sat in his office after another long day of meetings, his phone rang. It was Ava. "Mr. Owens," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "Mommy made dinner, and we all sat together. It was the first time we all ate at the table. Just the three of us. And it was really nice." Michael smiled, a warmth spreading through him. "That's wonderful, Ava," he said. "I'm so proud of you. I knew you could do it." There was a pause on the other end, and then Ava's voice became softer. "I miss you," she said quietly. Michael's heart ached, but he smiled. "I miss you too, Ava. But I'm always here for you. Remember that." "I know," she replied, "and I'll always remember you." As they said their goodbyes, Michael felt a wave of peace wash over him. He knew that Ava and Emily were on their way to building something beautiful together. He had played a part in their journey, but now it was time for them to take the lead. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that no matter where their paths took them, they would always have each other. And that was enough. Months passed, and life had started to find its balance again. Ava was thriving, her laughter filling the house as she and her mother, Emily, slowly built the foundation of a new life together. Michael had always known that there would be challenges, but he had also known that this was the right path, the one that would give Ava the love and stability she deserved. His role in their lives had shifted, but that didn't make him feel less important. He had played a part in Ava's healing. And now, as she continued to grow, he was proud of what they had accomplished together. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when Ava would call him, asking about her past, or wondering why things had to be the way they were. Michael always took the time to listen, to reassure her, and to remind her that her life now was about moving forward, about the love they shared, and the family they were becoming. As for Emily, she had come a long way. She had been through so much, both physically and emotionally, but now she was a mother again, and she was learning how to trust herself and her ability to care for Ava. Michael watched her grow in her new role, and although there were still times of self-doubt, he could see the love she had for her daughter shining through in every small gesture. Michael had been there when Ava needed him most, and he had kept his promises. But now, the time had come for him to take a step back. He had done what he could, and it was time for Ava to fully embrace her life with her mother. He knew that he would always be there for them both, but he also knew that Ava's journey was hers to take. It wasn't easy, especially when he saw how deeply Ava still cared for him. Their bond had become something strong and beautiful, something that went beyond the role of a temporary protector. He was a part of her life now, but he could see that she was ready to spread her wings and continue her journey with her mother. And so, Michael made the difficult decision to let go. He continued to visit them, to offer support, but he did so with a sense of peace. The family was healing, and Michael had played a key role in their recovery. One evening, as he sat alone in his office, the quiet weight of his thoughts pressing on him, he received a call from Emily. Her voice was warm, and he could hear the joy in it. "Michael," she said, "I just wanted to thank you again for everything you've done. I know Ava and I wouldn't be where we are today without your help." Michael smiled softly. "You both have done the hard work. You've come so far, Emily. And Ava, she's stronger than I could have ever imagined." There was a pause, and then Emily continued. "Ava wants to see you, you know. She talks about you all the time. I think she's worried about you." Michael chuckled. "She's a special girl," he said. "But she doesn't need to worry about me. She has you now." Emily's voice softened. "She needs both of us, Michael. We've both played such an important part in her life. I think we're finally a family." Hearing those words, Michael felt a deep sense of peace. He had always wanted to have a family of his own, and now, in some ways, he had found that with Emily and Ava. It wasn't the traditional family he had once imagined for himself, but it was real, and it was full of love. That night, after the call, Michael sat back in his chair, reflecting on how much had changed. A year ago, he had been a man focused solely on his career, his wealth, and his ambition. But now, he had a new understanding of what mattered most in life. It wasn't about the deals he had closed or the projects he had completed. It was about the people he had helped, the lives he had touched, and the love he had given. He had found purpose in something far greater than business. And as he thought about Ava and Emily, he realized that, in many ways, he had found a family he would always be there for, no matter where life took them. Michael leaned back, looking out the window at the city lights. He had come a long way, and though the road had been difficult, it had led him to something he never could have anticipated. It had led him to a love that was deeper than anything he had ever experienced, a love that had changed him forever. And as he thought about the future, he knew that, no matter where they went, he would always be a part of their lives. His journey was far from over, but the path ahead was clearer than ever before. As the months went by, Michael found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. The progress he had witnessed in Ava and Emily was remarkable, and he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had played a part in their journey. Ava, once a frightened little girl, now smiled more freely, her laughter filling the house in a way that made it feel like home. She had transformed into someone strong and resilient, someone who knew that she could trust again. And Emily, her mother, had come a long way too. The woman who had once been broken, struggling to hold on to the last bit of hope, was now a loving, present mother to Ava. She was learning to embrace her new role, and Michael saw the pride and warmth in her eyes every time she looked at her daughter. Their relationship was healing, and Michael knew it was only a matter of time before they would be fully whole again. Michael's role in their lives had changed, and though that was not an easy transition, he found peace in it. He had gone from being the protector to becoming a part of the support system that Ava and Emily needed to rebuild their lives. It wasn't always easy for him to step back, to watch Ava grow closer to her mother and gradually become independent of him. But he knew that was a good thing. It meant that they were both healing, and that he had done what he had set out to do. He had given Ava the safety and security she needed to trust again, and now she was able to trust her mother in ways that hadn't been possible before. The bond between them was growing stronger every day, and that was exactly what Michael had hoped for. There were moments, though, when the weight of everything would hit him. He had invested so much of himself in Ava's life, and sometimes it felt like he was losing her. Not in the sense that she was leaving, but in the sense that she was becoming her own person, moving forward with her life. It was a bittersweet feeling, proud of her growth, but mourning the loss of the role he had played in her healing. Michael had always been a man of control, of action. He had spent years building his company, making decisions, and always being in charge. But being a part of Ava's journey had taught him the importance of letting go. It had taught him that sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was to step back and give them the space they needed to grow. He didn't need to be Ava's everything anymore. He had been there when she needed him most, and now it was time for her to forge her own path, with Emily by her side. Still, that didn't mean Michael wasn't part of their world. He had come to realize that his relationship with Ava was not just about being her protector. It was about being her guide, someone she could turn to when she needed advice, support, or a reminder that everything would be okay. He had found a new kind of fatherhood in that, one that wasn't defined by proximity, but by the strength of the bond they had shared. One evening, as Michael sat at his desk in his office, lost in thought, his phone rang. It was Emily. "Michael, I just wanted to let you know how much we appreciate everything you've done," she said, her voice warm. "Ava talks about you all the time, and I can see how much she values everything you've taught her. She's so much more confident now." Michael smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest at her words. "I'm glad to hear that," he said softly. "She's a strong girl, and she has you now, Emily. That's what matters most." There was a pause before Emily spoke again. "I just want you to know that Ava and I will always be grateful for you. You've given us both so much more than I ever could have imagined." Michael's heart swelled at her words. "I'm happy to have been there when you needed me," he replied, "and I'm always here for both of you, no matter what." As the call ended, Michael leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of everything finally lifting. He had done what he set out to do. Ava was safe. Emily was healing. And together, they were building the family they had both longed for. Michael's role in their lives had been crucial, but it was no longer the center of it all. He had given them the tools they needed to stand on their own, and now they were doing just that. It was time for him to let go, but that didn't mean he would disappear. He would always be there for them, just as he had promised. As he looked out the window of his office, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Michael felt a deep sense of peace. He had changed their lives, and they had changed his. He had discovered what really mattered in life: love, family, and the bonds that held them together. And as he thought about the future, he knew one thing for certain: Ava and Emily would always be a part of his life, and no matter where their journey took them, they would always have each other. As Michael continued his journey alongside Ava and Emily, he began to see the changes in their lives taking shape. It had been months since that fateful night when he had first found Ava on the streets, a scared, lost little girl. Now she was thriving, her smile lighting up the room, her laughter ringing through their home, filling the spaces that had once been so quiet and empty. Emily, too, had made incredible strides. She had come a long way from the woman who had been on the edge of despair. With Michael's help, and most importantly with her own strength and love for Ava, she was becoming the mother she had always wanted to be. The bond between mother and daughter had grown, blossoming into something stronger than it had ever been before. But even with all the progress, there were still moments when the shadows of their past loomed large. Ava, despite her resilience, still had moments of fear. There were nights when she would wake up, crying out for her mother, not understanding why the world had been so unkind to her. And Emily, though stronger, still struggled with guilt over the time she had lost with her daughter. Michael could see it in the way she would sometimes look at Ava, as though trying to make up for the time that had been taken from them. It was clear that the road to full healing was not yet over. But Michael knew that they were on the right path. They had made it through the hardest part, the beginning. They had found their way back to each other. Michael was still a part of their lives, But his role had evolved. He was no longer the protector. Instead, he had become a mentor, a guide. He was always there when they needed him. But now it was time for Ava and Emily to create their own future, their own family. One afternoon, Michael sat with Ava in the park, watching her run around, laughing with the other children. She had come so far from the timid girl he had first met. And now, seeing her so free, so confident, filled his heart with pride. He had given her the tools she needed to move forward, and she had taken those tools and built a life for herself. She was no longer a victim of her past. She was a survivor, thriving in a way that he had never imagined possible. As he watched her play, Michael was struck by how much she had taught him, how much he had learned from her. He had been so focused on his career, on achieving success in business, that he had lost sight of the things that truly mattered. Ava had reminded him of the importance of love, of family, of connection. She had opened his heart to things he had long buried, and for that, he would be forever grateful. Later that evening, Michael sat with Emily in the living room, a quiet conversation unfolding between them. They spoke about how far they had come, how much had changed, and how much they still had to do. Emily thanked him again for everything he had done. But Michael, as always, deflected the praise. He knew that the real work had been done by Ava and Emily. They had done the hard work of healing, of rebuilding, and he was simply there to help guide them along the way. "You've done more than I could have ever asked," Emily said, her voice filled with gratitude. Michael nodded, a small smile on his face. "I didn't do it alone," he said softly. "You two have shown me what real strength looks like." As the conversation turned to the future, Emily spoke of the plans she had for Ava, of the dreams she had for her daughter's future. Michael could see the hope in her eyes, the determination to give Ava the life she deserved. It was clear that they both had big dreams, and Michael wanted to help make those dreams a reality. "Whatever you need, Emily," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here for both of you. Always." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had been through together. Michael had come into their lives at a time of crisis. But now, he was becoming a part of their story, a part of their future. As the evening drew to a close, Michael sat back, content. He had made a difference, yes, but more importantly, he had found something he hadn't realized: he was missing a family. Not a traditional one, not one bound by blood, but one that was built on love, trust, and shared experiences. And as he thought about what the future held, he knew one thing for sure: the journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Ava, Emily, and Michael, each of them had their own story, their own path, but together they had formed something beautiful, something unbreakable, and as long as they had each other, they would face whatever challenges the future held, hand in hand, with hope in their hearts. As time continued to pass, the journey that Michael, Ava, and Emily had taken together started to feel like a dream that had come true, one that was filled with hardship, but also with moments of incredible strength, growth, and love. Michael watched as Ava flourished more every day, her confidence blooming, her fears slowly retreating into the past. She was a different child than the one he had met so long ago, no longer weighed down by the pain of her past, but a young girl with hopes for the future. And Emily, too, was finally healing, becoming the mother Ava needed and deserved. Michael had always known that his role in their lives would evolve, but what he didn't expect was how much he would change himself in the process. When he had first met Ava, he was a man consumed by the pursuit of success, lost in the world of business and achievement. But Ava had shown him something far more valuable, something that no business deal, no amount of wealth could ever provide. She had shown him the power of love, of connection, and of what it truly meant to care for someone else, to put their needs above your own. He had once thought that success was measured by the things he had: money, status, power. But now he understood that true success was about the people you loved and the lives you impacted. That realization changed him in ways he never expected. As Michael spent more time with Ava and Emily, he knew that their lives were not just about surviving the past, but about creating a future one filled with joy, hope, and the promise of what was to come. And while their journey had been far from easy, they had come out the other side stronger, closer, and more connected than ever before. One afternoon, Michael stood at the kitchen counter in his apartment, staring at the phone in his hand. It was a text from Ava, an invitation to her birthday party. It wasn't just any birthday party. It was the first one she had ever had with both her mother and Michael in her life. A birthday where she had felt completely safe, completely loved. He smiled at the thought, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride. It had been a long road, but here they were, as a family, celebrating a new chapter in their lives. Michael had never imagined that something as simple as a birthday party could hold so much significance. But this one did. It was a symbol of everything they had overcome, everything they had worked for. It wasn't just about the gifts, or the cake, or the decorations. It was about the love and connection they had built together. When Michael arrived at the party, he saw Ava, her face lit up with a smile that could light up the entire room. She ran over to him, throwing her arms around him in a hug that made his heart swell. "Thank you, Mr. Owens," she exclaimed, her voice filled with excitement. "This is the best birthday ever." Michael chuckled, bending down to her level. "You're welcome, Ava. I'm so proud of you." He could feel the warmth of her embrace, the joy in her words. And he knew that this moment, this simple, beautiful moment, was the culmination of everything they had worked for. He had helped her find her way back from a place of darkness. And now she was free to live her life with the love and confidence she deserved. Throughout the party, as Michael watched Ava and Emily interact, he felt a sense of peace that he had never known before. He had given them the tools to heal, and they had taken those tools and created a beautiful life together. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about being there for each other, supporting one another through the challenges, and celebrating the small victories along the way. As the party came to an end, and Michael stood in the doorway, watching as Ava hugged her mother goodnight, he realized that this was what it was all about. It wasn't about the past, the mistakes, or the pain. It was about the future, and the family they were building together. Ava had found her place in the world, and Emily had found her strength as a mother. And Michael, he had found something he hadn't even known he was searching for: a family. It was a bond that could never be broken, a connection that went beyond blood and biology. It was a family built on love, trust, and the promise of always being there for each other, no matter what. And as he looked at the two of them, standing together in the living room, Michael knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, but they would face them together, as a family. He had helped them heal, and now they were ready to take on whatever the future had in store. He smiled to himself, knowing that this was the happiest he had ever been. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was the life he had created, and it was everything he had ever wanted.